Welcome to Pragim Technologies. I am Venkat. This is part 21 of SQL Server. In this session, we'll understand the advantages of using stored procedures over ad hoc or inline SQL. Now, before continuing with this session, I strongly recommend to watch part 18 of this video series where we have covered the basics of stored procedures. The greatest benefit of using stored procedures is that they are capable of reusing an execution plan. Okay. Let's understand what we mean by an execution plan. Okay, first of all, when we issue a query to a SQL server, three things happen. First, it checks the syntax of that query. Second, it compiles that query. Third, it generates an execution plan. Okay, what do we mean by an execution plan? An execution plan is nothing but for the query to retrieve the data, what is the best possible way available? Okay, now this depends on the indexes that are available in SQL Server to help that query. So based on all these factors, it's going to generate an execution plan, and then it executes the query. So next time when you issue the query, since that execution plan is already generated, it will be cached by SQL Server. So next time when you run the same query, what's going to happen? It's going to reuse that execution plan. Okay, so basically if it is stored procedures, stored procedures have been doing this from a long time. Okay, they are capable of retaining the execution plan, caching that execution plan, and reusing that. Okay, now even with ad hoc queries these days, they are able to reuse the execution plan. Okay, with the new versions of SQL Server that we have. But the problem is, even a slight change in the query, if it's an ad hoc query, so even a slight change in the query can prevent the execution plan from being reused. Let's understand what we mean by that. I have this table called TBL employee, which is very simple. It has got three columns: name, ID, name, and gender. And if you look at the query here, it select name from TBL employee where ID is equal to 1. Now when I execute this query, what's going to happen? First time when we issue this query, the syntax is checked, it is compiled, and execution plan is generated. And then it executes that query, returns the data back, which is very good. Now when I execute this again, the query is the same thing. Even ad hoc queries these days, they can reuse the execution plan. So it reuses that execution plan and it will be quick. But on the other hand, if I change the parameter, okay, I'm saying in the initial query ID is equal to 1. Now if I pass ID is equal to 2, it is not going to reuse the execution plan. It's going to generate a new plan for this. Okay, but whereas when it comes to stored procedures, look at this. I have the stored procedure. Now to the stored procedure, what the stored procedure basically does is it retrieves the name of an employee, for a given ID. So this stored procedure has a parameter called @id. So when you pass that parameter, it gives the name of that employee. Okay, now if you're new to stored procedures, I strongly recommend to watch part 18 of this video series where we have covered the basics of stored procedures. Okay, so now when I execute this one, look at this. The parameter that I'm passing is 1. So basically the same thing happens. Okay, the syntax, basically the procedure is compiled and then execution plan is generated, etc., etc. And then when I execute this again, the execution plan is reused. Okay, now even if I execute this, even if I change the parameter to 2, in case of stored procedures, the same plan will be reused. But that's not the case with ad hoc SQL queries. Okay, so in your interview, just in case if you're attending an interview and if somebody asks you, will stored procedures can't ad hoc queries reuse execution plan? They can, but even a slightest change in the query, maybe change in parameter values if it is not a parameterized query, or even a space in the query. If for example, if you look at this query, initially when I execute this, the plan gets created, I execute again, the plan will be reused. But even if I have a simple space here like this, and if I execute the same query again now, it doesn't reuse the execution plan. It's going to generate a new execution plan. So a simple change, space or change in parameter values, can result in a new execution plan being created. Okay, but that's not the case with stored procedures. Stored procedures can reuse the execution plan. Alright, another benefit from a performance standpoint that stored procedures has is they can reduce network traffic. Now, how can they reduce network traffic? Let's understand that. A stored procedure usually is something like this. We create the procedure, there is the body for the stored procedure, and within the body of the stored procedure, in reality, stored procedures are, or they've got enough number of lines. Maybe I have seen stored procedures even with 3000 lines of code within them, lots and lots of logic happening within them. Okay, now when we have such kind of a stored procedure and we want to execute that stored procedure, all you have to do is from the client application, it could be a .NET application, Java application, or simply a SQL Server Management Studio. So from the SQL Server Management Studio, you just need to specify the name of the procedure, this execute keyword, the name of the procedure, and the parameter values, and then you execute that. Okay, so over the network, what gets transmitted? Just this 3 words. Okay, but if this stored procedure, if you don't have a stored procedure, if it is just ad hoc SQL that you want to send from the client tools, then you have to send all those 3000 lines of code, which is definitely going to have a impact on network traffic. Okay, so stored procedure, since the stored procedure resides on SQL Server itself, all you have to tell the stored procedure to do is give the name of the stored procedure and the parameters and tell it to execute it. That's it. But if it is not a stored procedure, then you will have to pass all those ad hoc SQL statements from the client tool to the SQL Server, which will definitely increase the network traffic. So that's another benefit. So from a performance standpoint, these are the 2 advantages: execution plan reuse and network traffic reduction. Okay, and another advantage of using stored procedures is code reusability and better maintainability. Now if it's a stored procedure that resides on the server, now several applications can reuse that stored procedure. If there are multiple applications which want a similar kind of data, they can just call that stored procedure. Okay, now what is the advantage of doing so? The advantage of doing so is that tomorrow, for some reason, if there is a bug in that stored procedure or the logic of the stored procedure has to be changed, you only have one place to change it, irrespective of that being used by multiple applications. So maintainability also becomes much easier. Reusability definitely promotes maintainability. So stored procedures does that. Whereas if it is an inline SQL, what's the problem? If it's an inline SQL, then every application has to issue those SQL statements. They prepare that SQL and then issue those SQL statements from the application. So you have these copies of SQL statements spread across all the applications where you want to reuse that. And tomorrow, if there has to be a change in the logic, you will have to change it across all those applications, which makes maintenance a nightmare. Okay, so definitely stored procedures promote reusability and better maintainability. And from a security standpoint, okay, they provide better security as well. Okay, and they provide security by 2 means. Let's understand both of them. In terms of finer grained control, okay, so what do we mean by that? Let's say a user needs data from a specific table. Okay, now if a user needs, let's say I have IT department, HR department, payroll department, and one of the managers or employee needs IT department data. Okay, now if that table has got all these departments data, IT, payroll, HR, and if I grant him access to the entire table, what's going to happen is going to see everybody's records, and we don't want that. Okay, so in those cases, what you can do, you can actually create a stored procedure and grant him access to execute that stored procedure without actually granting access to the underlying table itself. So this allows us to have finer grained control over what data he can see. Okay, so stored procedures can provide security in that angle. Not only stored procedures, we can also use views for that purpose. Okay, but stored procedures is another way. And another way, how stored procedures provide security is they avoid SQL injection attack. Now, most of the people who are new to application development, they dynamically build SQL statements in the application and then issue those to the SQL Server database. Now what's going to happen is in the user interface elements, people can type in SQL and inject that to the dynamically built up SQL code. Now if you don't know how to do that, I have already recorded a video on what is SQL injection attack, how we can actually inject SQL, and how to prevent it using stored procedures. I have a video recorded already on this. Please watch this video. Okay, so these are the greatest benefits of using stored procedures. Okay, from a performance standpoint, they can reuse execution plan and reduce network traffic, and code reusability and better maintainability. And from a security standpoint, you can have finer grained control by granting access only to the stored procedure and not to the underlying tables. And they can also simply avoid SQL injection attack. I mean, not only stored procedures, even if it's an ad hoc query, if they are parameterized queries, they still can avoid SQL injection attack. On this slide, you can find resources for ASP.NET and C# interview questions. That's it for today. Thank you for listening. Have a great day.